Greetings all. Welcome to another session here of Tuzi Talks. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Tuzi, and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit today about mastering ESL and bilingual methods. In particular, today we're going to be focusing on standards-driven professional practice. Now, a lot of this information is going to be coming out of Herrera and Murray's textbook, Mastering ESL and Bilingual Methods. That's that textbook that's right over there. You can certainly download that from Barnes & Nobles or Amazon if you are interested in this textbook. Today, again, we're going to be talking about standards-driven professional practice. And in particular, we're going to be looking at some of the standards that are out there that are being used in English language learners and also in bilingual education. The three standards that we'll be looking at is the NBPTS, the CREDE, and then the TESOL Standards. Now, I'll be honest with you, prior to reading a text like this, I only ever heard about the TESOL and the NCATE standards, and they're really TESOL standards, let's be honest. But the other two standards do seem interesting, so we're going to run through some of those. Why look at standards at all? Okay, well, one of the primary reasons why teachers should be doing that is so that they can understand what the requirements are at each level and for each area that needs to be included when you're involved in teaching. One of the other interesting things is that as a TESOL specialist, I study these standards. I know the TESOL standards because they're part of what I am involved in as a teacher. I need to make sure that my students understand all the different components. But your mainstream teachers probably never study this. They have very little experience as far as education is concerned with learning about what these standards are. They may have students in their classrooms and they try to deal with them from the information and experience that they have in their background, but they don't have any formal training. So it would be very good for them to get this kind of training so that they can understand what the objectives are that they ought to be looking for, what components they should be trying to include, and also what are the language objectives that should be included. So trying to review this especially for mainstream teachers, it's good to find out what the best practices are for teaching second language learners, and also what the objectives are that the standard bearers create after they've done their research. Okay, so first of all, let's look at the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, NBPTS. And again, I have not heard of them prior to reading this text, but they are a board that's out there and they want teachers to be professional. Bear in mind, this organization is not related to TESOL at all, but they are related to professional standards and creating professional teachers, people who aren't just teachers, but they are professional teachers. Just an aside. When I was growing up in high school, I had a doctor that I would go visit, a local doctor, and the guy was amazing. I would go into his office with, a cut here or a growth there, or, and he would say, oh yeah, that's poison ivy, or that's this, or, he'd pull out books and say, yep, it looks like something like this. I was impressed that he knew all these different things. And his answer to me when I asked him, how come you know all this? He said, well, he's constantly studying. He's constantly trying to read up on what's going on and learning his craft so that he can be the best doctor he can be. And I was so impressed that this guy knew so much because he kept studying. He kept trying to learn. That's the way we as teachers ought to be. In my opinion, if a teacher is not a student, they're a bad teacher. A teacher who stops learning is now a bad teacher. And that's one of the primary goals that you're going to see with this National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. That's their goal, is to have teachers who continue to study, who continue to learn, continue to try and improve their craft. Okay, so they have some proposals or propositions that they try to espouse. One is that teachers are committed to students and their learning. Okay, to me that's a big word. This one here especially, they're committed to it. That they don't just finish their work and go home and they're done with it. And if I could just say, I am sometimes jealous of the guy who comes home from work and he turns his mind off and he doesn't think about his students or his work anymore. As a teacher, you can never do that. You're always bringing something home, whether it's physical homework that needs to be graded or whether it's an issue or concern about a student. You're committed to your students and to their learning. Prop 1. Proposal 2 here, the teachers know the subjects they teach and how to teach the subjects to the students. Okay? So if you're a language teacher, you need to know language. You need to know all the aspects of language that you're going to be teaching. If you're going to be teaching history or science or whatever, you need to do that homework. If you are not normally a physics professor, but you've got to teach physics to your ESL students, guess what? You need to study. You need to know that information. So you need to know the subjects, and you need to know how to teach it to your students. Prop 3, you need to be responsible for managing and monitoring student learning. This is a huge word, and this is a huge word. Okay, how it's done is going to be different based on different people. Some people are very type A, they're very organized, they write everything down. Other people don't write everything down, but they have the information stored here. They're more dynamic in that sense. Regardless, you're going to need to manage how they're learning. You need to monitor how they're learning. You need to modify how things are going based on their needs. Prop 4, teachers think systematically about their practice and learn from experience. This is big, in my opinion. This is this whole product development life cycle, or writing a paper type of process approach to writing, where you learn, you practice, you present, and then you assess what you've done and try to make it better. And you should constantly be doing that. A good teacher is going to do that. They're going to constantly be revising and seeing what they're doing and trying to make it better. Lastly, teachers are members of a learning community. They're involved with other professionals of their craft, be them scientists or, history teachers, or in my case, second language teachers. They should be involved with the organizations and the conventions and conferences and writing and workshops that are available to them. They're part of that community. And that's the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. Again, I've not heard of this organization before, but it does sound like a very viable and worthwhile organization to be involved in, especially if you are a teacher and you want to maintain your practice, your skills, your craft. Next organization that Herrera and Murray mention or talk about is the Center for Research on Education, Diversity, and Excellence. Again, I've never heard of this organization before, but they have a variety of standards that focus on education, diversity, and excellence. And their standards are, one, that it's a joint productive activity, that you're working with others in the field, other professionals in the field. Point 2 here, that part of what you're doing as an educator is that you're teaching you're focusing on language and literacy development. And so that should be the focus of what you're doing in any of the classes that you are teaching. Next is contextualization. Especially when you're dealing with diverse populations, that you need to contextualize what it is that you're teaching so that it can make sense to them. You need to be able to pull in that background information. You need to be able to connect it to what they already know, so that they're going to be able to understand more. Some of the research on teaching diverse populations indicate that some of the background information isn't included in normal text. And so therefore, people who are not familiar with mainstream culture may have difficulty understanding. So you have to put it into context. Standard 4 here is complex thinking, or what I would consider critical thinking, where you as a teacher need to be encouraging your students to think critically about the material that's being given. And so that's another standard that they're going to be focusing on. Standard 5, instructional conversation. This is the type of interaction where you as a teacher aren't simply lecturing. You're not just cutting the kid's head open and pouring the information in. You are actually going to be involved in conversation so that you can have some negotiation of meaning and you can have some verbal interaction so as to increase more learning evidence on the point of your students. The next standard there is modeling. When you're going to be teaching certain aspects of language or certain aspects of any type of learning, that you're going to try to model it, show them how it's done. If you're going to be teaching them the writing process, you actually walk through that process with them so that they can see how it's done. Last standard here is child-directed activity. This whole idea of this standard is that students should be involved in the learning process and they should be owners of their learning. This does not necessarily mean that they direct the agenda. You do have a core curriculum that you need to be teaching, but that you want it to be taught in such a way that they're taking an active role in the learning process, and they're taking an active role in the part of the direction, the way things are going, so that they can learn the standard, they can learn the core, but that they're more primarily involved. Again, it's less of a lecture, and it's more of them leading how that learning is going forward. Again, I've not heard of this organization before. If you'll note in Herrera and Murray's book, this is not the address that they gave you. The address that's normally in there has been changed. This used to be a secondary site. Now it's their primary site for the Center of Research on Education, Diversity, and Excellence. Last standard here is the TESOL standard, which stands for Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages. This is an international organization that focuses on teaching language to second language learners, regardless of their first language. They have 5 standards, and these are the 5 standards that I know, that I've worked with, been working with for a number of years now. These are the standards that you as teachers should understand and focus on when you're teaching language. First point here is language, description, acquisition, and development. You as a language teacher should know how to describe what language is. You should know all the components of language. You know, the syntax, the phonology, the morphology, the lexicon, discourse components, so that you can teach these components. You also need to know about acquisition, how language is learned and how the language process is developed. You need to understand those components as you are trying to teach your students. Second standard is culture, understanding what culture is in nature, what its role is in language learning, what this whole concept of cultural identity is, and how it impacts language learning. Culture is a huge factor in language learning. As one of my predecessors used to always say to me, language and culture are inexplicably intertwined. And so we need to recognize that we can't teach language apart from culture. We need to be teaching both of them. At the same time, we need to recognize that culture impacts how other people learn language, because they have their first culture to deal with as well as the second culture. So we need to understand what those are. Third standard is the whole realm of teaching, which would be, or part of the realm of teaching, which is planning and implementing and managing instruction. This is where you as a teacher, the educator part, has to come in. You'll note there's like 3 different sections here. We've got a linguistic side, we've got an anthropology side, and now we've got an education side. Actually, these 2 are education. They're going to put those combined. But you've got these different sections of second language education. One of the things I like about TESOL is that it's not really one field. We're talking here multiple fields that we as language teachers need to understand. Again, the third one here is planning. How to set up teaching language, not just the global scope and sequence, but right down to the lesson. How to set up teaching an actual lesson with specific objectives for all the language components, for the culture components, for the content components that you may be teaching. We need to understand and plan all that. We've got to implement it. How do we present this in such a way so that we can keep students involved, keep them learning language, and keep it interesting? And then, of course, managing instruction, how we maintain things as we go through the scope and sequence. Another standard that TESOL is going to require. Fourth standard is assessment and how we do assessment, whether it's formative assessment or a summative assessment, the different types of assessment that can be used, the alternative assessment opportunities that are out there as well. And the last standard is professionalism. And this goes back to the idea of being a continual learner as you go through the process. And also your disposition, how you treat your students, how you treat your colleagues, and how you treat the field of language teaching. You want to be professional in all of those areas. I made a little link down here that I do hope you go take a look at. We're going to go take a look at this in just a second. This has to do with, this is the actual TESOL standard document that's out there. And so we're going to take a look at that in just a minute, but this is the main part that you want to know here is what these standards are. This is more of a summary. Later on, I'm going to actually create a whole another video just on these 5 standards, and we'll look at them in more in depth. Okay. The next thing that Herrera and Murray had talked about in their text is the whole idea of establishing professional benchmarks. You go back and you look at this whole idea of teaching English to speakers of other languages, and you've got all these standards, yay. And you go back to the earlier standards as well, the National Board Standard and the Center for Research on Education, Diversity, and Excellence. We have these standards, but if people are not implementing what these standards are, what good is it? And so Herrera and Murray suggest that we use some type of benchmarks to verify that we are indeed matching and complying with these standards. And some of the things that they suggest that we do is self-assessment, critical reflection, and then practice refinement. In other words, see what we've done, see what was good, what was bad, and then make some changes. Makes sense. That's the idea here. Now, Herrera and Murray go into a great detail of describing what that is. I personally think it looks like this whole system life cycle. If you're in business, you'll see this product life cycle. If you're in software, you'll see it's a software life cycle. I found this online somewhere, and it was called the system life cycle. But it's the same idea where you identify some of the problems, you analyze what's needed, you design a system to solve it, you implement it, you test what you've done, you evaluate what you've done, and you start all over again. The process is cyclical. As a teacher, you want to do the same types of thing. You want to identify what your students are, find out what their needs are. You're going to be analyzing this. You're going to design materials so that they can learn whatever it is that you're going to be doing. You then implement that. You put it into practice. You go do a lesson or an activity. Maybe you create some new materials you want to test out on your students. You give it to them. You ask them, how it was later on. Then you evaluate it. How was it? How effective was it? Did they do better on your assessments because of it? Then you go back and start again with this process. And so this is basically what I consider the product life cycle, or what they call here the system life cycle. That's the whole thing that I think you should be doing as you're studying. Now, Herrera and Murray, they go through and they look for the same type of idea, and they had a whole series of questions for the section on language development and learning dynamics. So you as a teacher, you should be, again, reflecting, doing some self-analysis and critical reflection and practice refinement in language development and dynamics. How your language teaching aspects are hitting the mark or not hitting the mark with regard to these two areas. And then the same type of thing in the socio-political or socio-culture. How is what you're teaching impacting the students with regard to their culture and with regard to learning mainstream culture? And what was good, what was bad, what should be changed? And again, the next thing as well, you've got the planning, implementing, and managing instruction. You should evaluate your instruction and your planning and what was good, what was bad, and what can be improved. And the same thing with your professionalism, how you're treating your students, your colleagues, and how you are learning by going out to read professional journals and magazines and attending workshops and that kind of thing. And so it's these 4 steps that they recommend that you do so that you can continue to improve your craft. Now, as I looked at what they did in their text, and they had they had, dare I say, pages of questions that you should be asking, data that you should be collecting, and they had sort of one of those T's where you have, this is what I collected and this is how I analyzed it, and it was just a lot of information. And I thought, this is similar to the PSYOP, the OP part of PSYOP. And the OP of PSYOP is the observation protocol, where you're assessing how well someone used the PSYOP method. I thought it was interesting that they're using something similar that's found in the PSYOP method. I also thought it was interesting that they used some of the TESOL standards as the basis for their reflection, the planning and the implementing and the monitoring whole section, which I thought was an interesting thing that they had done there. In other words, they're trying to combine others' areas and do similar types of things. They also wanted you to use, they had lots of reflection, lots of data collection in the text. And I'm all for lots of reflection. Data collection is going to be more difficult simply because of the amount of time that some teachers have. Now, I know that there are some teachers who keep individual notebooks on all of their kids. That's a lot of work. I know that there are some teachers out there that when they create a test, they assess every question to find out whether it's a good question or not. They look up its reliability and validity. Great. There are going to be other teachers who are not going to be able to do that. So the reflection part is absolutely necessary. How you do the reflecting is going to be up to you as a teacher. And the data collection, right? They wanted you to use the previous information and the current reflection information and use that to refine what you're going to be doing in the future. And that makes absolute sense. You use what's been done in the past to help you improve what's going to be happening in the future. Me personally, and I teach currently at a college, I almost always at the end of a course, I give students some free points to tell me what they think. And sometimes they say, hey, this was good. Other times they say, oh, this needs to be changed. And I take that as some good advice to try to improve my craft. I'll use them. Now, I'll use their test scores as well. I'll use their attitudes in class as markers as well for things to change, possibly. But I want to be able to use that information, those notes, to change what's going to happen in the future. That's what a good teacher is going to do. Herrera and Murray, they go real heavy on data collection, and there's a lot of questions that they've asked. Maybe early on, I think some teachers may need that, but I just thought it was a lot of questions that they were digging into. Hey, before I go, let me go run over here and look at the National TESOL Standards. And this is their site here. You can go to TESOL.org and see what they've done. You can go in here and you can hunt down their standards for P through 12 ESL Teacher Ed. It's a 105-page document. I would highly recommend, if you're going to be involved in English language learning or if you're involved in bilingual education, that you come look at this. And they have a lot of good things in here. You're going to break down all the different standards and the rubrics that are involved. But one of the main things I wanted to show you was on my page 19 was this little graphic here of the standards that they have. You'll remember that their standards included language and culture and instruction and assessment, and then the last one was professionalism. And they're all here in this grid, which I very much like, this little chart. Shows all the different areas that are involved in teaching second language learners. Understanding that language is a system. I have to understand all the components. Understanding how the development process is, right? And understanding culture and how it affects students, both good and bad. How their culture is perceived by the main culture. Again, good or bad, it can be. Go to the instruction side and how you need to plan and how planning is done and how implementing is done. And all of this is based on research and appropriate standards. And then using technology and the different types of assessment and the proficiency assessment and classroom-based assessment, which would be more of your formative assessments. And then all of this combined together with this whole concept of professionalism, both within the field and with your colleagues and your students. So I would highly recommend that you come look at this. They break down all the standards very nicely. Here's the first domain, and they explain what this is in the later pages. They also provide rubrics for it. It's an excellent standard. It's the standard that I think is the most important of the ones that are in this text. And obviously, if you go look at this last chapter of Herrera and Murray's Mastering ESL and Bilingual Methods, you'll note that their primary focus is also on the TESOL standards. Again, I do thank you for stopping by. If you do have any questions or comments, you can shoot them down below, or you can shoot me an email. I do thank you for stopping by, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye now.